Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked for us to make a start. I know a few people are still coming in. It's good to see so many people coming to the session after lunch. My name's David Hewitt. I'm an oil and gas analyst with Credit Suisse here in Asia, and I'm going to moderate the session today. I've got to say, before lunch, I thought we had what was an excellent geopolitical session, which was hosted by Sir John Major. I think we heard Anders Rasmussen say that there is a new Cold War with Russia, and it's with a more dangerous Russia. A very, very interesting session. I mention that because, in my mind, geopolitical factors are increasingly important in the oil and gas space. So I think that this session, which is titled The New Energy Reality, is an excellent follow-on from this morning's panel. And I'm delighted to welcome a star-studded set of panelists today. Firstly, Dr. Feridun Fesharaki, who's the chairman of Fax Global Energy. Professor Ken Koyama, the chief economist and managing director for the IEEJ in Japan. Professor Ni Leixiong of the School of International Studies at Shanghai University. And finally, Dr. Pierre Noël, a senior fellow for economic and energy security at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. As with this morning's session, I think the idea is to try and get into a question and answer session rather than straightforward presentations. So all I'm going to do is ask one question of each panelist, and then I'm going to turn it over to the floor. So with that, let me start with you, Feridun, and maybe you could outline your view for both crude price direction and maybe gas/LNG prices in the short and medium term. Thank you.
And I have 20 minutes?
You have a fraction of that.
Thank you, David. Our views are that in the second quarter of this year, by April, May, probably until June, you still have a substantial drop in the price of oil, anywhere between $5 to $10. That is provided that there is no agreement reached between Iran and 5+1. As soon as any agreement is reached, immediately you will have a drop in the price of oil. And that may be coming by the end of this month. Iran can ramp up production by 1.2 million barrels per day in anywhere between 90 to 180 days. They've been practicing and getting ready for this to go. So that would make a substantial impact on the market. What happens in the third quarter is that we expect the prices to be back in the 50s, perhaps 50, 55, fourth quarter, similar. The real issue is that the changes which are needed by OPEC and Saudi Arabia are two important changes. One important change is that they are hoping to see a slowdown or a substantial drop in the U.S. growth of production, not base. The growth of production last year was over 1 million barrels per day. This year, running between 800,000 to 1 million barrels per day. So something like 100, 200,000 barrels per day would satisfy that some serious change has taken place. And that we don't know because nothing has happened yet. So we can't expect the OPEC meeting in June to do anything because nothing has happened yet. We need to wait at least to the end of this year, early next year, to see whether anything has happened. Beyond that, I expect that we are going to see higher oil prices only come if the Saudis are willing to cut production. Without them participating in substantial cut in production, and after seeing what they want to see in U.S. and bringing the Iraqis to the table, which is also a very tall order, then we may get to a higher price of $80, $90. If we do that, then all those people who went out of business or reduced production, they will come back again. You can't kill it. All you can do is postpone it. So best scenario, David, is $50 to $80 volatility over the next 10 years. Likely, probably $40 to $60 for the next 10 years. To get back to the higher prices, we may have to wait 15, 20 years, if ever, to get back to higher prices. So we have this environment. Within that environment, the LNG business also very heavily impacted, as so many producers, particularly the folks in Australia, which brought all these expensive projects on, they will not be seeing any return on investment for many years to come. But you people in the financial community are very forgiving. As soon as cash flow comes in, you forget about the real economics. So cash flow will come in this year and next year, and then everybody will be happy family. But the real economics of some of these projects are negative for many years to come. low oil prices do serious damage to these projects. And if you don't believe that oil prices will rise, many of these projects will not be economic. Insofar as the indexation from the US hub, anything from the US you bring into Asia has a minimum price tag of $10 a million BTU, minimum price. So at the moment, oil indexation is cheaper. But really, we can't compare one is cheaper compared to the other one. Basically, low oil prices are bad for new projects. Low oil prices are bad for existing projects. So people just have to get more efficient. And I know that they haven't gotten used to it for a while, but low oil prices make you smarter.
Excellent, thank you. I need low oil prices for a long time to get smarter, I suspect. Dr. Koyama, if I can ask you, what are the primary changes to the Japanese energy mix going forward? And do current low crude and gas prices affect Japan's thinking in that regard?
Yes, but the fact remains that energy vulnerability of Japan still an important challenge for Japan. After the nuclear accident 4 years ago, we successfully avoided any unplanned large-scale blackouts thanks to the combination of power saving and fuel consumption increase. But there's lots of cost to do that. And that's why we are still struggling with the issue related to a nuclear restart. As you may know, that Japanese Independent Regulatory Authority gave a green light for the restart of the 2 nuclear power plants. One is operated by Kyushu Electric, the other operated by Kansai. The process is undergoing, but it takes time. I personally expect that later summer or beyond, we'll have a restart. And it will contribute to the address that Japan's 3E issue. 3E means that the energy security and environmental protection, which means that CO2 emission abatement and economic efficiency. But beyond that, there are lots of uncertainty. How many nuclear power plants can restart at what timing? And it will create lots of social, sensitivity with regard to the energy mix debate. Last April, the Japanese government made a very significant decision on the basic energy plan of Japan, which is a strategic statement that the nuclear power should be regarded as a baseload power supply. But there's no concrete numerical target up to 2030, which we require. That's why the government decided to establish a specific government committee to discuss and decide that energy mix. Probably before summer, we hope we may come up to the conclusion. And media report tells us that there will be some potential that the nuclear power share can be decided between 15 to 25% for total power generation. But there are lots of discussion, argument about that how much share should be covered by renewable, nuclear power, and coal, which also has an implication for global CO2 emission issues. So before summer, we don't have any concrete number, but anyway, it is very important. And about the question of low oil price impact, of course, it gives a kind of a great gift to Japanese economy, that the lowering oil price and potentially that the lowering LNG price from the April onward will give us lots of economic benefit. And it may affect in some part for the discussion for the long-term energy mix. But I do believe that we do not depend on the lower price forever. As Dr. Fischer pointed out, currently we are seeing that a very weak soft market, but market may fluctuate, market is volatile. So for the strategic point of view, we need to have a more, strategic consideration in terms of Japan's long-term energy policy. In that context, we may need to secure oil and LNG supply for long term, but we may need to diversify away from energy mix by utilizing nuclear power as well as renewable power. So that's the current situation.
Great, thank you. Professor Ni, turning to China, how do you see low crude and gas prices driving China's focus on its energy mix its approach to the East and maybe the South China Sea and its own domestic shale production?
In China, well, there has been heated discussion about this matter. Overall speaking, now we are looking at low and declining oil price. China is able to lower the cost of modernization. If you look at strategic reserve of around 90 days, well, this plan may see the opportunity of being realized. I personally think that China will make use of this opportunity to accumulate strategic oil reserve. Now, in China, energy demand is huge, and it is also an important factor affecting global oil price. China faces this dilemma, a short-term as well as a long-term one. In the short run, we will grab the opportunity to do something favorable to the development of oil industry, including overseas acquisition. Now, when share price drops, well, people tend to sell the shares very quickly. And then if you look at overseas investment, well, people may be saying that this is a wrong decision. And if you look at the strategic reserve in China, perhaps we can take the opportunity of low price to acquire some oil mines. This may be a good strategic move. In the long run, it is clear that this is not a renewable resource. We have 1.4 billion people in China. We cannot rely on this in the long run. For the long run, we have to put our focus on renewable energy like solar power, wind power, hydropower, and nuclear power. So this is the direction of the Chinese government. As regards the reserve of shale oil, I think China is also in a dilemma. The cost of development is very, very high. Technologically speaking, well, we still cannot pass the threshold. And, well, we need some core technology. And we face pressure in relation to a bottleneck. Now in the US, it's 20, and we are at 16 now in relation to technological engineering. But then this is not really a big problem. But the point is we need water resources to support the exploration. Most shale oil is in the northern region, and in the northern region there is a shortage of water. In southern China, there is huge reserve of shale oil. However, population density is high. If technology is not up to standard, there will be a serious environmental pollution, which is going to be a big disaster. Because of huge reserve of shale oil, I think the Chinese government will not give up this opportunity. As you know, well, you know about the distribution of shale oil in China. It accounts for 1/3 or 1/4 of our area. So we're talking about huge reserve. So if we don't develop it, if we don't explore it, well, definitely we are failing ourselves. So we won't give up this opportunity. There will be comprehensive investment in it. But there is a lot of difficulty in the development. There are a lot of obstacles and resistance. In Sichuan and Yunnan, the exploration and development is being objected to by some financial experts and some other enterprises. Well, now there is tendering and also some experimentation on a pilot scheme basis. But then in the long run, focus will be placed on the renewable energy segment. That's the first point. Secondly, in China, Well, China is very determined to develop like solar power and hydropower and so on in the future. So what are the evidences? In Yangtze River, in the Three Gorges, we have built the hydropower station. When the hydropower station was built, there was a lot of controversy in China. It is being regarded as a weak point in terms of national defense. In the future, when there is war, if the hydropower station was damaged, then in the lower course, the whole province will actually collapse. So, well, the enemy will attack the hydropower generation station at the Three Gorges. So this is about national defense. But then China has made a lot of consideration. China has borne the risk in national defense, so the hydropower station was still built. So this reflects 2 points. First of all, China insists on peace. China doesn't want any war. China wants to create a peaceful global environment. So on the basis of peace, China is brave enough to build this hydropower station, even with the risk of damage. And then energy, in terms of energy development, the focus will be on those non-renewables. And then in South Sea and Donghai, East Sea, well, we are talking about some existing resources, for example, shale oil, but then the environment, the scope is very big. And now there is globalization and integration of different countries' economies. So the natural resources in South Sea have not caused any war. There are also problems along the East Sea, and also a natural gas battle between China and Japan, and also the resources in South Sea, and then the Taiwan Strait, the Sino-American relationship, the Taiwan crisis, and so on. All these have proven that commercial consciousness is a natural enemy of war. So in the past decade, almost 2 decades, up till now, China has already gone through a series of tests. Now, if you look at China and her neighbors, even though there may be arguments or quarrels, so far, there is no friction at all. So this can prove that commercial competition or commercial consciousness is a natural enemy of war. Starting from the 21st century, we can see that this remark is being proven. So low oil price, and also the South Sea problem, and also China's relationship with her neighbors won't be problems. Now, there are many factors behind the declining oil price. Russia is one thing, whether or not Saudi Arabia is going to raise price, and so on. These are all factors. But then there's also the China factor. The China factor can also be influential. If the Chinese government is going to announce that we have decided to develop shale gas in a large scale, now our technology is already up to standard. Some critical technologies of shale gas development have been developing very rapidly. It is so fast that it is unexpected by many external parties. So if the Chinese government is going to release such a news or an announcement, then there will be a lot of impact on oil price.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, turning to you, Dr. Noel, and sort of reflecting on the last commentary, What are the primary challenges to energy security in Southeast Asia, in your view?
Thank you. I think to assess what the new context of low oil and gas prices mean for Southeast Asia, you have to go back to the policy challenges that most governments face in this region. So they face essentially three challenges. The first one is to continue fueling the economy. In some of those countries, electricity consumption rises by 5, 6, 7, 8% a year, 13% for Vietnam. These are extremely high rates of growth in energy and electricity consumption. That's the first priority, but there are two other priorities which actually conflict with each other. The first one is that those governments need to reduce energy subsidies. They have to do that for both fiscal reasons and external balances reasons. But at the same time, they want to contain the rise in final energy prices for both obvious political reasons, but also macroeconomic reasons. Those last two objectives, again, are in tension with each other. And if you take them together, they create a very powerful incentive to minimize the procurement cost of energy in those rapidly growing economies of Southeast Asia. Well, an element of context is that at the margin, natural gas is paid almost at international market prices in Southeast Asia. This is a complete change from the period since the 1980s, where natural gas consumption grew extremely fast, much faster than fast-growing energy consumption across the region, on the back of rapidly growing production of cheap domestic gas. This is now over. At the margin again, electricity generators and industrial consumers pay gas more or less at international market prices. So you have a direct competition between coal, usually imported coal, or in Indonesia, Indonesian coal, but paid at international market price, and internationally traded gas, which means LNG. So up until the collapse of the oil and gas prices, the region was or seemed to be on the verge of a dash for coal and a massive displacement of natural gas by coal. Coal looked like the default baseload electricity generation technology with, for a baseload plant, levelized cost over 30 years that were, nearly half that of a gas-fired plant. The collapse in the price of gas changed completely the situation, and now, at current gas prices, current spot LNG prices, gas is a no-brainer in Southeast Asia. So this is how the issue presents itself for those countries and those governments. They need to minimize the cost of energy procurement. For the short term to mid-term, it means almost exclusively a choice between natural gas and coal. Coal used to be much cheaper than gas, but of course comes with environmental challenges that in the future can only go up, including international pressure of some sort on CO2 emissions. The collapse in the oil and gas prices completely changes that and is very favorable to those governments because it removes the trade-off between cost minimization and environmental pollution. So I think the question that must be very prominent in their thinking, their strategic thinking, is, what do we expect for the price of LNG, of internationally traded gas, beyond the short term? Is it a new era of much cheaper gas compared to coal, relative to the period we've just seen? Or will the price of gas compared to coal shoot up again beyond the next 4 or 5 years? And for them, this is a very important question because, again, they need to install a lot of electricity generation capacity every year, and they just can't afford to wait. So That's the key strategic question for them, bearing in mind that, of course, this comes after the first challenge. The first challenge is to continue fueling the economy, but that has, after all, little to do with geopolitics or international markets. This is really about the quality of policy making, the quality of institutions, the quality of power purchasing agreements, so the creditworthiness of PPA off-takers in the electricity industries across the region. This is how I see the challenges at the moment.
Excellent, thank you. So I think we've done a good job of getting through initial views quite quickly. Let's open up and use the balance of the time to take questions from the floor. We have microphones available, so if there's a first question, there's a hand up over there, so if we can just get the mic over there.
Thank you very much. Very interesting opening statements. We're hearing talk that we could be starting to see the pricing of gas off the Henry Hub pricing in the States, but old-timers in the oil market have been telling me that you hear this every now and again, but for your long-term contracts, they're still expecting it all to be put on prices. I'm just wondering, based still on against oil prices. I'm just wondering what the panel's view is.
Maybe Ferdinand, if you'd start.
You know, in this market today, we have a very clear indication of the gas demand is pretty much full. There is not that much extra room for anybody to buy anything new, not until the Japanese contracts in late this decade, early next decade. Some of the existing contracts expire, and the renewal might give you some volume to go forward. So the situation is relatively set for the next 10, 15 years. You will find easily 80% of the contracts remain oil indexed. Nobody in the right mind is going to ask somebody to sell you at the Henry Hub price if the supply is not from the US. Your basis risk must end up being corresponding to the place where the gas comes from. So although in the past people said, okay, sell me gas from Australia, from Mozambique, on the basis of Henry Hub, nobody says that anymore. The contracts which come based on Henry Hub, the amount is already sold. We have about 47 million tons sold, and another 10, 15 million tons likely. So that would be 70 million tons out of the total LNG trade of something like about 300 million tons. So we cannot imagine that there would be a dramatic additional supply from the US. We remain very skeptical about anything coming from Canada over the next 10, 15 years, with one exception of a project led by Petronas, which may be still receiving FID by the middle of the summer. So the relationships of, let's say, 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 is pretty much set. And unless we have these contracts expire after mid-2030s, I don't think we're going to see a dramatic change. So things are pretty much set. And today, we realize that gas-to-gas competition is not so much fun anymore. We used to think gas-to-gas competition makes it cheaper. Gas-to-gas competition makes it more expensive than oil indexation. So people who have gone fully supporting gas-to-gas competition have to begin to rethink for the consumer what is best. Oil market has rules. Gas market has no rules. It can get out of control. Last year, this time, the price of Henry Hub was $8 a million BTU. This year is $2.70. I don't know what will be next year. But the oil market at the moment is allowed to have a free fall because there are some specific conclusions which the big players are waiting to draw from it. But it's not really a market which operates totally freely without any boundaries.
Koyama-san?
Yeah. I just want to mention about the issue from the viewpoint of Japanese buyers. Japan buyers traditionally depend on one single way of procurement based on the JCC pricing. But nowadays, I think that the portfolio management approach will be required. As Dr. Fischer pointed out, when the Japanese utility decided to buy US LNG, Some people thought that it should be cheaper, but depending on the price of Henry Hub and crude oil price, there is no guarantee which is cheaper. But still, the portfolio management approach is very, very important. Firstly, of course, that this is portfolio. Secondly, U.S. LNG gives us a new source of supply as for diversification. And thirdly, that U.S. LNG is characterized by the flexible supply. That the destination-free contract is very important. So in that context, I think that the value of that U.S. LNG based on the new pricing mechanism is still very important for the Japanese buyers.
Thank you. Do we have a follow-up question or a next question? Well, maybe while we're thinking, let me ask. A lot of both oil and gas as LNG transfers through the South China Sea. Do we think that there's an increasing geopolitical concern, maybe rather than risk, that the reliability of that transfer could become challenged as we go forward, and especially with a lack of maybe a pivot, as people talk about pivots, both Putin's pivot this morning and of course the US threatened pivot into Asia? And maybe I'll start with you, Pierre.
Well, my short answer would be no. I just don't see. I mean, I don't think this is a. Okay, so the real. I mean, one way to rephrase your question is: do we think there's going to be an all-out war in Asia? You know, if the answer is yes, then you have your LNG transit problem. But short of that, I mean, I think those transit security issues are usually overblown. I mean, even the Malacca Strait, I think, tends to be inflated as an issue in the strategic literature. I just don't see that's a real strategic concern for the industry.
Koyama-san, do you see it impinging Japanese procurement planning going forward?
I think that transit safety or transit security is a kind of international common goods. It's affect and its interest for everybody in this region and also for the United States as well. So I think that in a normal circumstance, I think that there will be no big concern over that. And of course that there are some geopolitical tensions and stakeholders in this region, but I think that to protect the safe transit for energy or a strategic commodity like energy is essential for everybody. That's the kind of real common understanding. And as far as this common understanding exists, I don't think it's a real threat to any country in this region. That's my hope.
And Professor Ni, I think you talked earlier about a harmonious relationship with its neighbors. That would be your view, following Koyama-san's view? There is very little risk of challenge to security and delivery?
Everybody is thinking of the Second World War to see which place is more sensitive, which place has strategic meaning. Well, we are just thinking of what if. Now, South China Sea is very important, everybody knows that. But as such as now, all countries are making use of this so-called marine lifeline. So, even though there may be dilemma or conflicts among different countries, however, the foreign affairs chips or bargaining power are still having their play. Now, I think if there is a conflict between along the Taiwan Strait, it's not that mainland China cannot go past the strait. It's just that if that route is being blocked, now in China, 2 million people, 2 million population may be affected. Even though that will not happen, we will still think of that in formulating our strategies. So this is a potential threat. It has to be considered. However, everybody believes that that may not happen. But if you talk about the Ministry of National Defense of each country, well, of course, they will formulate contingency plan. They will think of the what-if scenario. So at present, everybody is still attaching importance to peace. Of course, we cannot place all the funds and put all the efforts into safeguarding the situation. What if there is a war?
David, I wanted to say something about the geopolitics, a little bit going back to what you said earlier on, and that was about the session that you attended before this, about the role of Russia. You know, the world cannot do without Russian energy. I am convinced of it. They can do without Iran, but cannot do without Russia. So all of these sanctions, all these restrictions, at the end of the day, they all face the same problem. If there is no energy coming out of Russia, the world cannot go on. And if we're going to adjust ourselves to live without Russian gas and without Russian oil, we need a 15, 20-year plan ahead of time. So while we keep talking about geopolitics and we think about, okay, the European sanctions are renewed against Russia, and the people in the White House, they think they can really teach the Russians a lesson. We must realize that the dependence is so great that to change it needs a decade or longer. And whether the Russian oil and gas goes to Europe or goes to Asia, we cannot do without it. So we have to come up with ways to adjust to it and arrange it. Sanctions against Russia will not solve any problems. And if the other side wants to continue the policy as it seems like it, I just can't see where it will go. So until we find a solution, and I don't think we can find a solution also, if we want to get ourselves out of the Russian dominance for gas, then we need to have multi-trillion-dollar plans long in advance and plan it. So we need to adjust our thinking in an environment that we have little flexibility as far as Russia is concerned.
So your statement is it's not just a European problem, it's a global problem?
It's a global problem. It's a global problem. It's very important for Europe, but it's not just Europe.
And Pierre, can I be unfair and ask Europe's preparation for a challenge to Russian supply, both on oil and gas? Have they done 10 or 15 years good work? Are they ready?
Well, I think the only part of the Russian supply that is really at stake in the crisis is what transits through Ukraine, right? The rest is absolutely safe, and there's absolutely no talk on either side of this trade to shrink it beyond, again, the stake of Ukrainian transit. Now, Ukrainian transit is not small. You know, it's at the moment is about 50% about 50 billion cubic meters a year. So the building of South Stream, this pipeline system across the Black Sea, was supposed to allow Gazprom and its strategic partners in Central and Southern Europe to bypass, to complete the bypassing of Ukraine, because half of it has already been done through Nord Stream and under the Baltic Sea. So South Stream is the real casualty of the crisis so far. Now, Gazprom has replaced that with what they call Turkish Stream, which is exactly the same pipeline, actually the same steel, because the steel was already almost starting to be put in place when they canceled the project. They will build something, they will build this pipeline to Turkey. So the first phase will be for the Turkish market. So this is sheer reallocation of gas from a declining market in Europe to a rising market in Turkey. The second phase will be probably a mix of Turkey and Southern Europe through existing infrastructure I think that's probably going to go forward. Beyond that, there's a real question about whether those remaining 20-something billion cubic meters a year will simply be a net reduction in Russian-European gas trade, or whether there will be a way to reallocate them to Asian market through the so-called Western route between Russia and China. Well, I don't know, but put that in context. This is not a collapse in European gas, in Russia-Europe gas trade. Of course, if you were to do some sort of a maximalist scenario where the entire relationship collapses, which I think is an extremely low probability risk, then you would have quite important global implications, because Europe would jump on the short-term LNG market, and that would mean that prices in Asia would also jump. And longer term, European companies would have to become much tougher competitors to Asia in terms of access to liquefaction capacity and investment in liquefaction capacity. But we are not there we are not there at all. This is not how the crisis is evolving now. We're talking about a reallocation of supply from Europe to Turkey, okay, of Russian gas of about 20 BCM plus. And we're talking about some 20 BCM out of a trade of 150 BCM that is at stake, let's say.
Excellent, thank you. Gentlemen at the front here, if we can get a mic. There we go.
Yes. Taking into account that today the current wisdom is that the oil price has collapsed because of the high production of shale oil in the US, let's talk a little bit about that. Apparently, about 4 or 5 million barrels a day are being produced currently in shale oil. The specific question will be, in 1 year time, taking into account the high depletion rate of these oils, and taking into account this price of $50, $40 per barrel, how much production will be lost in the US in 1 year time?
Fair. There'll be no production lost. Only we're talking about the growth. I think we need to keep in mind that the cash cost is much lower. I think, David, you mentioned $35. I look at it more like $20, $25 for cash cost. But really, all the market is looking for is that the growth, which is 1.2 million last year, this may be a little bit under 1 million, goes to 100, 200,000 barrels per day. But we are not looking at any scenario that actually base of production falls. But you are right, the increase in the US production is about 4.5 million barrels per day. By the end of this year, more than 5. So if that was in OPEC, it would be the second largest OPEC producer by itself, just the incremental growth itself. So once you allow this to be created, then it's hard to send it back. And I think this is the ultimate choice that the Saudis and OPEC faced. Every year they waited, this will go up by 1 million barrels per day. The problems become bigger and bigger and bigger. They should have done this 2 years ago when it was only 2 million barrels per day. And if they didn't do it last September, then by the end of 2015, then it would have been 15 and 16 would have been 6 or 7 million barrels per day. There is a limit to it, though. There is not an endless volume. Based on what we know today, the limit may be another 3 million barrels per day above what is produced, or 2.5 million above what is produced. But the speed of it getting there is what impacts the market. You can have it come in 3 years, or you can have it in 10 years, every year 200,000 or 300,000 barrels per day. But we are not really looking at any decline in the base. So the market has changed permanently. You can't make one collapse and go back to where it was. It has changed permanently. All we need to see is that how the market can be managed. So I'd like you to think about a traffic jam in Bombay, where the cars are going in all directions, and there is a little puny policeman standing there directing the traffic. And that policeman are the Saudis. And they tell the people, do this, do that, and nobody listens. So the policeman is gone now. All the cars have crashed. And they're not going to be able to find a way out. and the policeman is not coming back until certain conditions are met, that would take sometimes 2, 3, 4 years, if at all. So until there is a need for the Saudis to come in and cut their own production along with other people, we're not going to get out of this environment. And if we do succeed, then all the production from the US we pushed out is going to come back. So we have a volatility and a stability which is introduced for the long term to the business. There is no balance. Wherever you see the price of oil being flat, somebody is fixing it. It has to be volatile. And there's nobody to fix it at the moment, so you have volatility. And that is normal in the business.
I don't know whom of the panelists to ask, but is a US oil embargo or partial oil embargo on Russian oil supplies is a probable scenario? I'm not asking about rational is or not, but is it a probable scenario?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Is a US embargo on supply of Russian oil is a probable scenario?
It's not feasible. It's not feasible. It's not that it's probable or not. Some things are impossible. If they're impossible, it doesn't matter which politician says what to whom. It cannot be done. It's too big. It's too important.
Well, the US can ban imports of Russian oil into the US, yes. And they've done that many times with many countries in the past. That's about all they can do.
In case of, say, I agree with Dr. Fischeraki that oil flow to European market is so large, so actually virtually it's not possible, except for very, say, really unprecedented circumstances. But anyway, the stake of Russian oil and Russian gas is too large. And in case, if we look at the situation for Asian oil flow and gas flow, it's still relatively small as compared to the European flow, but it's already, I think, that affecting that business. For example, in case of Japan, as you may know, there are lots of LNG or gas project planned for Eastern market, including Japan, Korea, and of course China. China is now talking with lots of big story about that pipeline gas, both from East Siberia and West Siberia. But as you know, that LNG project, there are lots of LNG projects. But under even current circumstances, that the sanctions started to work, and maybe it's difficult to see that the LNG product from Russia, except for Yamal, can develop easily for the next few years. That's already sanction works at this moment.
The financial sanctions, not the. I think financial sanctions are much more effective than actually sanctions against Russian energy issues.
And also for LNG, the technology is very important. Russian company needs to have some technology in terms of LNG project.
Professor Ni, if the rest of the world went to sanctions against Russia, as unlikely as it may be, would China be a participant?
我看这个其他国家对俄罗斯的制裁也是有限的。
Other countries' sanctions on Russia are also limited. This is not sustainable. It is a lose-lose scenario. This is not only about the economy. It is also a measure about foreign affairs. So, well, there can't be a war, and of course you want to show colors to Russia, then what can be done? And well, you can only do something in relation to the economy. However, if it continues for a long time, it is not meaningful. It is not going to be sustainable, and it is going to be a lose-lose. China is not likely to take part. I think China will take the opportunity to lower price to acquire the oil of Russia as soon as possible. That's all.
Good answer. We're almost out of time, and I always ask this question, it's unfair, but of each of the panelists, where do you see crude oil, let's say Brent, at Christmas? You won't be held to it. You won't get a letter telling you got it wrong. That's my challenge. But where do you think crude will be at Christmas, Brent?
哎呦，这个是等于猜这个。
This is like making a guess on when Jesus is going to come again.
是这样的。
It's like this. It's like this. I think. Well, of course, China has once lost out, and Hu Jintao, at the peak or at the highest moment, had imported some oil as part of our strategy. So, of course, this is very unhappy to our society. It's now almost 10 years after that, and oil price at that time was too high. Everybody was developing it, mining it. Everybody was working on the oil field, and there are changes in the supply and demand. And so, just now the oil expert said that at $60 or $80, it may take 10 years. If it has to continue to go back to the peak, it may take 15 years. I agree to this point, because at the highest point, we had bought oil, and now we are at a very, very low price. It's around 10 years from the peak. So everybody has been developing and mining oil, and no one has expected that there is such a big decline. So one cycle takes 10 years, and now people are of the view that the price is too low, so everybody is closing down the operation or suspending or terminating the operations, and then no one will expect that there would be a rebound, but then this is a cycle. So in 15 years' time, I think we may see a high oil price, so we have to be prepared.
Thank you, sir. One number answers, maybe, from the three of you?
57.
I think
57.57.
Thank you.
60.
No better.
No bets on?
No better.
No better. Wow.
No, I don't. I just don't know. I think it's unpredictable.
We're out of time. I think it's been a very interesting session. We've covered both the fundamentals of oil, but also the geopolitics, which I think are increasingly coming together. Please do thank our distinguished panelists for their participation, and to you.